At 57 years old, I emptied my entire $112,000 retirement fund to buy and restore a century-old Carousel with my brother, only to watch him forge a sole ownership title, sell it to a theme park for $1.3 million, and try to buy my silence with a $4,000 check he called a finder's fee. What he didn't know was that our late mother had hidden the original notarized memo in her old metal recipe box, tucked behind the cards for meatloaf and sugar cookies, and on the back she had written 5 words that would burn his entire life to the ground. Claire, he will steal from you. This paper is your vengeance. Today my brother dresses as a clown and sells tickets under a bright banner that reads The Merry-Go-Round of Justice, and every time that Calliope starts playing, I whisper a thank you to the mother who saw it all coming. My name is Claire Bennett. For 32 years I worked as a records clerk in the Westbrook County Courthouse basement, where I handled property deeds, notary logs, and corporate filings, and I developed an eye so sharp I could spot a misaligned notary stamp at 10 paces. My father had been a locksmith for 4 decades before he died, and by the time I was 12 he had taught me to pick a standard pin tumbler lock, to feel the click of a wafer with a half-diamond pick, and to read a contract the way you'd read a schematic. Those 2 skills, document scrutiny and lock manipulation, sat dormant for years until they became the twin engines of my survival. The third detail that matters is this: I never married, never had children, so when I poured everything into restoring a Carousel, it was the closest I ever came to building a legacy. That legacy was supposed to include my younger brother Michael, the golden child, the one with a grin that made people forgive his every failure. In the spring of 2012, Michael showed up at my door with a binder full of photographs of the old Meridian Park Carousel. It had been built in 1912 by the Denzel Company, 42 hand-carved basswood ponies with glass eyes and real horsehair tails, all of them rotting in a climate-controlled storage unit after the amusement park went bankrupt. The ride needed a complete restoration, new bearings, a rebuilt platform, fresh paint, re-gilding, electrical work. Michael had done no research and had no money, but he promised me that if I put up the capital, he would handle the operations and split the future earnings 40% to me, 60% to him. I was cautious. I insisted on a notarized memorandum of agreement. We sat at our mother's kitchen table, the same green Formica table where I had done my homework as a girl, and we signed a single-page document witnessed by a neighbor. The memo stated that I, Claire Bennett, held a 40% ownership stake in the Meridian Park Carousel restoration project, that no sale or transfer could occur without my written consent, and that all net proceeds from rentals or sales would be distributed according to those percentages. The notary was a woman named Dorothy Keene, a retired schoolteacher who lived 2 doors down, and her stamp was crisp and perfectly aligned. I gave Michael a cashier's check for $112,000, my entire $401K and my pension lump sum, every cent I had. For the next 18 months I worked alongside a restoration crew in a rented warehouse. I stripped layers of lead paint with a heat gun and a respirator, repaired cracked basswood legs with epoxy and sawdust filler, sanded everything down to the raw wood, and applied 23 coats of primer, paint and varnish to each pony. I learned to gild with genuine gold leaf, a maddeningly delicate process where a single breath could ruin an afternoon's work. Michael showed up occasionally, mostly to take photographs for a website he never finished. By the time we were done, the Carousel was a museum-quality masterpiece, and an independent appraiser valued it at $1.3 million. I allowed myself for 1 foolish month to believe I had secured my retirement. Then the paperwork arrived. Michael filed a new title application with the state, listing himself as sole proprietor. He had forged my signature onto a release form, clumsily traced in ink that was half a shade darker than the original. The notary stamp on that form belonged to a Janice Kelso, a name I had never heard. I didn't discover this until after he had already sold the Carousel to Grand Lakes Theme Park and deposited the proceeds somewhere I couldn't trace. He handed me a check for $4,000 and a 5-page release absolving him of all claims. I remember standing in my kitchen holding that check and feeling the floor tilt beneath me. I didn't cash it. I didn't scream. I just went silent. For 2 years I lived on my Social Security payments and a small inheritance from an aunt, too ashamed to tell anyone what had happened. I kept the release form and the check in a drawer, and I stopped talking to Michael entirely. The Carousel was gone, and I assumed I would die with nothing. Then Mom died. That is where this story truly begins. Her name was Helen, and she passed on a Tuesday in March, quietly in her sleep at the age of 81. I was already at her house, sitting in her faded floral recliner, unable to move when Michael and his wife Trish pulled into the driveway. They arrived within 3 hours, not to mourn but to take inventory. Trish swept through the front door in a black dress that looked like it cost more than my first car, her heels clicking hard on the linoleum floor. She started opening cupboards immediately, pulling out Mom's china, muttering about antique values and estate auctions. Michael stood near the door with a clipboard, making notes as if he were auditing a failing business. I was invisible, a ghost in the corner, still wearing the same cardigan I had slept in the night before. Trish got to the kitchen counter and picked up an old green recipe box, the one Mom had kept beside the stove for my entire life. It was a mid-century tin box with a hinged lid, its corners worn to silver, the original label long since faded. Inside were hundreds of recipe cards, some typed, some handwritten, all stained with butter and vanilla and decades of love. Trish lifted the lid, grunted, and dropped it back on the counter. "Nobody wants this junk," she announced. "Old wives' cures and butter-stained cards, it's worthless." She tossed it into a cardboard box marked donation. I said nothing. I just watched it land among old pot holders and chipped coffee mugs. That night after Michael and Trish left for their hotel, I padded into the garage in my bare feet and retrieved the recipe box from the pile. The garage was cold and smelled of gasoline, and my breath hung in the air as I carried the box back into the kitchen. I sat at Mom's table, the same green Formica table, and I opened the lid. The scent of vanilla and old paper rose up like a memory, and for a moment I was 6 years old again, watching Mom roll out pie dough. I started flipping through the cards, past meatloaf and sugar cookies and a handwritten remedy for coughs that involved honey, lemon and whiskey. Behind the laminated cards, tucked against the back wall of the box, I found a yellowed envelope with no address. I pulled it out and opened it. Inside was the original notarized memorandum of agreement dated 7 years earlier. My signature, Michael's signature, Dorothy Keene's perfect notary stamp, the ink still faintly raised. The paper was slightly crisp at the edges but entirely intact. I stared at it, my heart thudding, and then I turned it over. On the back, in my mother's shaky cursive handwriting, were the words, "Claire, that man will destroy you if you let him. The original partnership memo is here, notarized. It's your proof. Use it before you sign anything. I love you, Mom." I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles went white. My mother had known. She had kept the original, probably because she never trusted Michael, probably because she had watched him manipulate and charm his way through life and had seen the pattern. She had left this paper for me as a weapon, a dead woman's insurance policy against her own son's greed. I was no longer a discarded sister. I was holding a bomb, and I knew exactly how to use it. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that the truth eventually finds its way to the surface, no matter how carefully someone tries to bury it. 2 days after the funeral, Michael and Trish sat me down at that same kitchen table with a stack of papers. They used gentle, patronizing voices, the kind you'd use with a confused elderly relative who can't quite remember where she left her glasses. Trish patted my hand repeatedly, her diamond ring glinting under the overhead fixture. "We're so worried about you, Claire, all alone in this big old house with all these memories. Why don't you come stay with us? We have that lovely in-law suite above the garage. You'd have your own entrance, your own space. We can rent out this house and you won't have to worry about a thing." Her tone was sweet as antifreeze. Michael slid a thin stack of documents across the table. On top was a durable power of attorney granting him full control over all my personal assets, including any accounts, properties, and future income. Beneath that, a quitclaim deed for Mom's house, transferring it into his name alone. And beneath that, the same 5-page release form I had ignored for 2 years, absolving him of any claims related to the Carousel sale, with a fresh signature line at the bottom, already dated. The $4,000 check was paperclipped to the corner, dated from 2 years earlier, as if they'd been holding it in a drawer waiting for the right moment to pounce. The ink on the check was slightly smeared, and I noticed the account number didn't match any bank I recognized. I flipped through the documents slowly, letting my eyes go unfocused, letting my hand tremble a little. The records clerk in my brain, however, was cataloguing every irregularity with clinical precision. The quitclaim deed was sloppily drafted, missing the required parcel identification number and the legal description of the property. Without those, it was unenforceable. The power of attorney gave them sweeping control not just over Mom's house, but over all my assets, including any future inheritance or legal settlements. That was a red flag you could see from orbit. The Carousel release referenced a finder's fee agreement that I had never signed, and the notary stamp on it, though similar to Dorothy Keane's, had a commission expiration date that didn't match the signing date. I knew, because I had spent 32 years cross-referencing those exact details, that the state required notaries to reapply every 4 years, and this stamp's expiration was off by 18 months. It was a clumsy forgery, the kind an amateur creates with a scanned image and a color printer. I looked up at Michael, my face slack and tired. "I'm just so exhausted, Mikey, I can't think straight right now. Can we do this next week, maybe after I've had some rest?" I let my voice catch, let my lower lip tremble. He and Trish exchanged a fast, flickering look, a micro-expression of pure frustration. Then Trish smiled her porcelain smile. "Of course, honey, you take all the time you need. We'll move you into the guest suite this weekend so you're not alone." I nodded weakly as if I were grateful. Inside, I was already planning. I packed a single suitcase, a week's worth of clothes, my toiletries, my father's leather lockpick case, and Mom's recipe box. The box went into a small canvas tote that never left my side. That Saturday, I moved into the in-law suite above the garage of their 5-bedroom colonial. It had a separate entrance, a tiny bathroom, and a window that overlooked the flower beds. It was perfect. From that perch I could watch, listen, and wait. Living under their roof was like being inside a nature documentary about financial predators. I made myself small and quiet and harmless. I started weeding the flower beds every morning, bent over with a trowel, a floppy straw hat hiding my face. It was the perfect cover. On my 3rd day there, a Tuesday, I was crouched near the kitchen window, pulling dandelions, when I heard Michael's voice through the open screen. He was on the phone, his tone shrill and desperate. "I told you the funds are coming. The old lady is going to sign this week, and then we can clear the lien. Just give me another 60 days. No, I cannot pay the penalty right now. No." A pause, then the sound of the phone slamming onto the counter. Trish's voice, sharp and hissing. "If she drags her feet, we're ruined. That Atlas loan is 38 days past due. They've already sent a formal demand letter and they are talking about a forensic audit of the entire transaction." I kept my head down, my trowel in the dirt, and I made a mental note. Atlas Capital, loan past due, forensic audit. That explained the urgency. Over the following weeks I collected more red flags the way a naturalist collects specimens. Trish ordered a $9,000 Italian leather sectional, bone white and ludicrously impractical, delivered on a Tuesday morning. 3 days later, she drove home a leased BMW 7 Series with temporary plates, the painted deep metallic sapphire that shimmered in the sun. Yet I noticed Michael dodging calls every afternoon from a number labeled County Tax Assessor on the caller ID screen. He would let it ring, stare at it and silence it, his face going pale. One night around 2 in the morning, I heard him pacing in the living room directly below my suite, muttering about the escrow hold and that meddling compliance officer at Grand Lakes. He mentioned a name, Patricia, and a date, the 15th. I wrote all of it down in a small spiral notebook I kept hidden between Mom's recipe cards. I was building a timeline. The accident that gave me access to his home office arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Trish, in a desperate attempt to impress a neighbor from the country club, decided to cook a boeuf bourguignon from a glossy cookbook. Within 20 minutes, she had managed to shatter a wine glass with a carrot peeler and slice the meat of her palm open on a jagged shard. Blood sprayed across the white marble countertop, a shocking splash of red against all that cold stone. She shrieked like a fire alarm. Michael, utterly useless in any crisis that didn't involve a spreadsheet, started shouting my name. I came downstairs to find Trish howling, her hand wrapped in a sopping red dish towel, and Michael pacing in circles trying to dial 911 with shaking fingers. I took over calmly, applying direct pressure to the wound with a clean cloth, elevating her arm above her heart, and telling them to drive to the ER. "She needs stitches, not an ambulance bill," I said. "I'll stay and clean up. You go." I guided them to the garage, Trish whimpering about her manicure, Michael fumbling with his keys. As the BMW backed out of the driveway, I noted that Michael had left his home office door ajar. It was a heavy oak door with a brass handle, and he usually kept it locked. He had been in a panic, and panic makes people careless. I had maybe 90 minutes. I went to my room first and retrieved my father's leather lockpick case. Inside, nestled in felt grooves, were a tension wrench with a twisted tip, a half-diamond pick, a short hook, and a city rake. I had practiced with them occasionally over the years on the old filing cabinets at the courthouse, just to keep the muscle memory alive. My father's voice echoed in my head. "A lock only keeps out the honest. Everything else is just a delay." I slipped the case into my pocket and walked downstairs. The door was unlocked, but the real prize, a 4-drawer filing cabinet in the corner, was not. It was a Mosler upright, the kind with a simple wafer lock that any novice could open in under a minute. I knelt on the carpet, my knees popping, and examined the keyway. The lock was a single-sided wafer design, no security pins, no sidebar. I inserted the tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway and applied a light clockwise pressure with my thumb. Then I took the half-diamond pick and slid it gently across the wafers, feeling for the telltale resistance of an unset wafer. The first two clicked easily. The third bound, then released with a tiny vibration. The fourth was sticky, probably from dust, but I worked it back and forth until it set. On the fifth pass, the plug rotated a full quarter turn and the drawer slid open with a satisfying hiss of metal. The whole process took maybe 40 seconds. I wiped my fingerprints off the drawer handle out of habit. Inside, a hanging folder labeled MISC. Contracts contained a thick manila envelope with no markings. I pulled it out, placed it on the floor, and opened it with steady hands. The first document was the forged title application for the Meridian Park Carousel, dated 18 months earlier. My signature sat on the line where I supposedly relinquished all ownership, and I could see immediately that it was a tracing. The ink was a slightly different shade of blue, a cool navy instead of a warmer black blue, and the stroke widths were uneven, bulging at the curves where the forger had hesitated. The notary stamp belonged to that Janice Kelso, and I committed the commission number to memory. Beneath that was the sales contract with Grand Lakes Theme Park, 14 dense pages of legalese, signed by Michael as sole proprietor. The final sale price was $1,300,000, with a clause stating that the seller warranted unencumbered title. Attached was a wire transfer confirmation showing the proceeds had been deposited into an account at Crestline Bank, an account number ending in 8832, with a routing number that I later traced to an offshore branch in the Cayman Islands. That was clever. He had tried to park the money outside U.S. jurisdiction, but he had left the paper trail right here in this filing cabinet like a fool. The most damning document was a promissory note and security agreement for a $300,000 business loan from a private lender called Atlas Capital. The loan had been originated 6 months before the Carousel sale, using the Carousel itself as collateral. My forged signature appeared as co-signer on page 4, meaning I was personally and jointly liable for the debt. The interest rate was 18%, compounding daily, and the note was now in default. A UCC-1 financing statement had been filed with the state, attaching a lien to any proceeds from the Carousel. I calculated quickly in my head. With default penalties and accrued interest, the total owed was now north of $400,000. Michael had sold an asset I co-owned, pocketed the money, and left me legally on the hook for a 6-figure debt. I also found a demand letter from a law firm retained by Atlas, referencing potential exposure for fraudulent conveyance and threatening to pursue personal assets. The letter was dated 2 weeks before Mom died. The pressure on Michael was immense, and I was his escape hatch. I photographed every page with my phone, making sure to capture the forged signatures in close-up, the notary details, the loan terms, and the UCC filing number. I then opened the middle drawer and found a wastebasket full of shredded documents. I sat on the floor and started piecing strips together, matching the tier patterns. After 10 minutes, I had reconstructed enough of a bank statement to see a $50,000 cash withdrawal made the day after the Carousel sale closed, and a credit card bill showing charges for a luxury resort in Cabo San Lucas. I photographed those too. Then I carefully reassembled everything, slid the envelope back into its folder, locked the filing cabinet, and wiped the exterior clean. I was back in the kitchen, scrubbing blood off the counter with bleach, before their car even pulled into the driveway. That evening, while Michael and Trish were still rattled from the hospital, I made a phone call from my suite. I called the state notary division, gave them the name Janice Kelso and the commission number from the forged stamp, and asked if they had a registered notary by that name. The clerk on the line typed for a moment, then said, "No, ma'am, that commission number doesn't exist. There's never been a Janice Kelso registered in this state." I thanked her and hung up. The forgery was now confirmed by a government office. I added that note to my spiral notebook, right next to the recipe for meatloaf. The following week, I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Samuel Halpern, my mother's attorney for the last 30 years. He was a stooped man in his late 70s, with a reputation for being as sharp as a razor and as ethical as a monk. We met in his office, a dusty suite above a bakery where the air smelled of cinnamon and old law books. He handed me a sealed manila envelope. "Your mother left instructions that this be delivered to you after her passing," he said. "She was quite insistent. She said it was a dead man's switch, whatever that means." I opened the envelope. Inside was a notarized copy of the same partnership memo I had found, along with a letter in Mom's handwriting. The letter read, "Claire, I never trusted Michael. When you two started that carousel, I had a feeling he'd pull something, so I kept this copy and I recorded a phone call. The tape is with Halpern. Use it if you have to, be the strong woman I raised." Halpern produced an old micro-cassette player from his desk drawer and pressed play. The recording was tinny but clear, a phone call captured on my mother's answering machine. Michael's voice impatient and condescending. "Mom, stop worrying. Claire's getting her 40% once we start earning. I promised on paper. I just need to keep the title in my name temporarily for the loan. It's a technicality." My mother's voice soft but firm. "You make sure you take care of her, Michael. I mean it." His response, I will, I'm not a monster." The tape clicked off. Halpern looked at me over his glasses. "That's a binding admission against interest. Combined with the memo, it's a jackhammer." Halpern made a few calls and connected me with Detective Angela Reeves of the county's Financial Crimes Unit. We met the next day in a conference room at the Sheriff's Department, a windowless room with a grey metal table and a single fluorescent light that buzzed faintly. Detective Reeves was a woman in her 40s with short greying hair and eyes that didn't miss anything. I laid out everything: the memo, the recording, the photographs of the forged documents, the Atlas Capital loan, the UCC lien, the Cayman account, the confirmation from the notary division. She listened without interruption, her face a stone mask. When I finished, she said, "This is exceptionally well documented. You've done most of my job for me." She brought in a compliance officer from Crestline Bank, a man named Thomas Kwan, who specialized in fraud detection. Thomas reviewed my photographs and the original memo, and his eyes widened. He explained that the $3 million from Grand Lakes was currently sitting in an escrow account and had been frozen for 3 weeks due to a title dispute raised by the theme park's internal auditors. The park had discovered the UCC lien during a routine title search and had flagged the chain of ownership as clouded. Additionally, the Janice Kelso notary stamp had triggered an automated fraud alert in their system because the commission number didn't match any state record. Thomas had already opened an investigation, and my evidence was the missing key. He placed an immediate administrative hold on the entire account under federal banking regulations, which would lock it for up to 90 days pending a full review. That hold was a fortress. No one could touch a single cent without a court order. Detective Reeves then asked me to do one more thing: get Michael to incriminate himself on tape. She handed me a small recording device disguised as a key fob, a black plastic rectangle with a car logo printed on the front. It had a range of 30 feet and a battery life of 12 hours, activated by a single press of the panic button. The microphone was sensitive enough to pick up a whisper from across a room. We practiced in her office. "Keep your voice calm and level," she said. "Let him get angry. The angrier he gets, the more he'll incriminate himself. Your job is to provoke a clear admission that he knew you were a co-owner and that he forged your signature." I agreed. We would stage the confrontation at the bank, where Michael would be summoned to resolve the escrow dispute and would be forced to bring me along. But before I could do that, I needed to be absolutely certain that I felt no residual loyalty. My mother had given me the evidence, but I still had a small, stubborn part of me that remembered Michael as the boy who taught me to ride a bike, the brother who held my hand at our father's funeral. I needed to extinguish that part, so I devised a test. One afternoon when Trish was out shopping and Michael was home alone, I staged a medical emergency. I waited until he was in the living room, hunched over his laptop, his fingers clattering on the keyboard. I had placed the release form and a pen on the kitchen table earlier, knowing he would see them. Then I walked to the doorway, clutched my chest, let out a strangled breath and crumpled onto the hardwood floor. I made sure to hit hard, a loud thud that echoed through the room. I lay perfectly still, eyes closed, one arm twisted behind my back at an unnatural angle. I slowed my breathing to almost nothing. I heard his footsteps approach. Then they stopped. I waited, every nerve on fire, counting the seconds. 5, 10, 15, nothing. No one knelt beside me. No one called out my name. Instead, I heard him mutter, "Oh, for God's sake, not now." His footsteps retreated. I cracked one eye open. He had walked to the kitchen table, grabbed the release form and sat down in the living room chair, his back to my crumpled body. He started reading the fine print. Minutes passed. I heard him call Trish on his cell phone, his voice flat. "Hey, Claire collapsed or something. I think she's faking. The papers are on the table. Come deal with her when you're done." He didn't call 911. He didn't check my pulse. He just sat there reading his legal documents while I lay on the floor like a broken doll. After 10 minutes I stirred, groaning. He glanced up. "Oh, you're up. You should probably see a doctor after you sign these. He tapped the release form with a pen. That was the moment. The last filament of sisterly affection snapped with an almost audible sound. He had stepped over my dying body to save his paperwork. There was nothing left to salvage. 2 days later, a formal notice arrived from Crestline Bank on heavy letterhead with a raised seal, summoning Michael to a meeting to resolve the escrow dispute, and explicitly requiring my presence as the other interested party. The letter was signed by Thomas Kwan and looked completely authentic, because it was. Michael was elated. He thought this was finally his chance to get the money released. He drove us to the bank's corporate offices in the downtown financial district, a sleek glass tower reflecting the pale morning sky. Trish sat in the back seat, briefing me on what to say the entire drive. Just tell them you support Michael's ownership and you waive any claim. It's a simple formality. Then we all get paid, and you get a nice bonus for being cooperative. His hand patted my knee like I was a well-trained dog. I nodded, my face blank, the key fob recorder in my cardigan pocket already activated with a single press. We were escorted to a conference room on the 4th floor, a long room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a polished mahogany table. Thomas Kwan sat at the head, a slim man in a charcoal suit with a tablet in front of him. Detective Reeves stood near the window in plain clothes, her badge visible on her belt. A uniformed officer waited near the door, his hands clasped behind his back. Michael's smile faltered for half a second when he saw the officer, but he recovered quickly, his salesman's grin snapping back into place. So this is a bit more formal than I anticipated. No matter. My sister and I have an agreement. He laid the release form and a new notarized affidavit on the table, the affidavit stating that I had never owned any part of the Carousel and had been fully compensated. Trish placed a hand on my shoulder, her manicured fingers pressing just a little too hard. Thomas Kwan spoke first, his voice calm and measured. Mr. Bennett, before we proceed, we need to clarify the chain of title on the Meridian Carousel sale. Our records show an unresolved partnership claim and evidence of a forged notarization. Could you explain how you came to be listed as the sole owner? Michael leaned back in his chair, relaxed and expansive. That's simple. Claire here helped with the restoration as a family favor, and I offered her a finder's fee once I sold it. She was never an owner. That memo some people might have heard about was just an informal note for her peace of mind, never filed. I've always been the sole proprietor on the official title. She's going to sign this affidavit today and clear up any confusion. Right, Claire? He turned to me, his eyes hard but his grin still fixed in place. I picked up the pen, let it hover over the affidavit. The room was silent. Michael leaned forward, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. I set the pen down, turned to face him and spoke clearly, making sure the microphone caught every syllable. I will not commit perjury today, Michael. Not for you. You forged my signature on that title application. You stole every cent of my retirement. You tried to leave me for dead on your living room floor while you grabbed your papers. I have the original notarized partnership memo from 7 years ago, signed in Mom's kitchen. I have the forged title from your filing cabinet with that fake notary stamp you invented. I have the recording of you admitting to Mom that I was entitled to 40%. And right now on this recording you just lied again. This ends. I pulled the key fob from my pocket, the tiny red light blinking steadily. Michael's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then a horror so complete I could see every vein in his forehead. Trish lunged at me, her composure shattering. You recorded us, you bitter, scheming old hag. Detective Reeves stepped between us in a single fluid motion, one hand raised, the other resting on her badge. That's quite enough. Michael Bennett, Trish Bennett, you are both under arrest for forgery, fraud and conspiracy to commit financial exploitation. You have the right to remain silent. The uniformed officer moved forward and cuffed them while Reeves recited the Miranda warning. Michael started babbling about lawyers, about how I had always been unstable, about how this was a family misunderstanding and we could work it out. Trish spat a string of venom that I won't repeat, her carefully constructed image dissolving into red-faced fury. Thomas Kwan informed them that the escrow account would remain frozen permanently and would be subject to restitution proceedings, and that the Cayman account would be subpoenaed under a mutual legal assistance treaty. Grand Lakes Theme Park, he added, had already been notified and was cooperating fully, eager to distance themselves from a fraud that could taint their brand. The officer led them out, Trish's heels dragging on the carpet, Michael's voice trailing into the hallway. As she passed me, Trish glared and hissed, "You'll regret this." I looked at her and said, "No, I won't." The legal process took 8 months. Michael was initially charged with multiple felony counts, including forgery, grand larceny, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and conspiracy. He eventually pleaded guilty to 1 count of forgery in the 2nd degree and 1 count of grand larceny in the 3rd degree, a deal that spared him prison time but loaded him with consequences. Trish pleaded to a reduced conspiracy charge. The judge, a woman named Margaret Chen who had handled many elder abuse cases, showed no leniency during sentencing. She read a prepared statement that cited the calculated cruelty of the fraud and the profound breach of familial trust. I gave a victim impact statement, standing at a podium with the original memo in my hand, and I told the court about the moment Michael stepped over my body. The judge's expression didn't change, but her gavel came down hard. Michael received 5 years of supervised probation, 1,000 hours of community service, and full restitution of the $112,000 I had originally invested, plus an additional $200,000 in punitive damages for the years I lost and the emotional harm. Trish received 3 years of probation and 500 hours of community service, but the real punishment was the one the judge tailored specifically to the crime. The Carousel itself had been held in impound during the investigation. Because the sale was fraudulent, the title reverted to me as the rightful owner under the partnership memo. The court issued a declaratory judgment confirming my 100% ownership, since Michael's fraudulent actions had voided his own claim. Grand Lakes Theme Park formally cancelled the purchase contract and paid a $100,000 settlement for their role in accepting a clouded title, which I used to cover my legal fees and some overdue taxes. The $3 million in the Crestline escrow account was never released to Michael. Instead, the court ordered it transferred to a trust in my name, dedicated solely to the maintenance, restoration, and operation of the Carousel. The trust would pay me a modest salary as its caretaker and curator, and any net profits from rentals would flow back into the trust or into my retirement accounts. I renamed the Carousel Painted Ponies Perjury. I had the entire ride rehabilitated again, the ponies gilded with genuine 23-carat gold leaf this time, the canopy repainted in stripes of scarlet and cream, the rounding boards decorated with hand-painted roses. I commissioned a large banner in vintage circus lettering that reads "The Merry-Go-Round of Justice," and a second sign with the new name. I began leasing the Carousel to county fairs, harvest festivals, and small carnivals across the Midwest, and it became a beloved attraction not just for its beauty, but for the story that came with it. Local newspapers ran features, and eventually a small regional magazine put it on the cover. The judge's community service order was specific. Michael's 1,000 hours must be served in direct connection to the Carousel. For every single event where the ride operates, Michael is required to serve as the ticket taker, dressed in a full clown costume, oversized polka dot pants, a ruffled collar, giant shoes that honk when he walks, a red foam nose and full white face makeup with a painted smile that he must apply himself before every shift. He has to stand at the ticket booth, greet families, and recite the exact phrase I scripted for him. "Welcome to Painted Ponies Perjury. Tickets, please." The banner above his head ensures that every parent who pulls out their phone captures the image of the man who stole his sister's Carousel, now selling tickets to it. His wages from the booth, a state-mandated minimum hourly rate set by the probation department, are garnished entirely and deposited back into the maintenance trust. He has to smile and hand out tickets while children climb onto the very ponies he tried to steal, and he can't say a word about it. The humiliation is complete, public, and ongoing. Trish's community service, meanwhile, requires her to clean the Carousel horses and polish the brass poles. She wears standard coveralls and a hairnet, and she scrubs the same basswood ponies her greed nearly sold away, using a mild soap solution and a soft cloth, exactly as I instruct her. She has to show up for every event, rain or shine, with a bucket and a rag, while her former country club friends pretend they don't see her. I made sure the local paper ran her name in the article. I never sought revenge for its own sake. I sought justice, and I found it. My mother from beyond the grave had given me the tools, and my father's old lockpicking kit and my decades of document training had done the rest. Every time I see that banner snapping in the summer wind, every time I hear the calliope start its tinny, cheerful tune, I think of her. I think of the note she left, the 5 words in shaky cursive, "This paper is your vengeance." And I whisper thank you to a woman who knew her own son well enough to protect her daughter from him, even after she was gone. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. If this story gave you a sense of satisfaction, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes the truth goes round, and sometimes the universe just needs a little help balancing the scales. I'll see you in the next story.